In the middle of the Cold War, the most valuable weapons weren't always missiles. Sometimes they were secrets. And in 1959, one of those secrets fell from the sky. A Soviet satellite, part of a highly classified program, re-entered the atmosphere and crashed in a remote region of Southeast Asia. Inside it was technology no American had ever seen up close. Cameras, sensors, engineering that could reveal exactly how the Soviet Union was watching the world from space. If the United States could recover it, they wouldn't just gain intelligence. They would gain insight into the future of surveillance itself. But there was one problem. The satellite hadn't fallen on American soil. It had landed in territory watched closely by Soviet allies, which meant that any attempt to retrieve it would have to be done in secret, without being seen, without being caught. Because if the mission failed, it wouldn't just be a lost opportunity. It could trigger an international incident and expose one of the most daring covert operations of the Cold War. This is the story of the CIA mission that set out to steal a Soviet satellite before anyone else could reach it. At the height of the Cold War, space had become the newest battlefield. The United States and the Soviet Union were racing not just to launch rockets, but to dominate the skies above the Earth. Satellites offered something revolutionary: the ability to observe from orbit, to photograph enemy territory, to gather intelligence without crossing borders. For the Soviet Union, early successes in space had already demonstrated their capabilities. They had launched satellites ahead of the United States, proving that they could place advanced technology into orbit and potentially use it for both civilian and military purposes. But what exactly those satellites could do remained unclear. American intelligence could track launches, estimate trajectories, but they couldn't see the systems up close. And in a conflict defined by uncertainty, that gap in knowledge mattered. Because if the Soviet Union had developed more advanced surveillance capabilities than expected, it could shift the balance of power. It could reveal weaknesses, expose deployments, or worse, provide targeting information in a future conflict. The United States needed answers, not assumptions, not estimates, certainty. And then, unexpectedly, an opportunity appeared. Reports began to surface of debris falling from the sky, unusual fragments, metal components, pieces that didn't belong to any known aircraft. Analysis quickly confirmed what it was. A Soviet satellite had come down, and it hadn't been fully destroyed on re-entry. Some of it was intact. For American intelligence, this was more than luck. It was a rare chance to access something that had never been accessible before. Actual Soviet space technology, recovered, studied, understood, but there was no time to celebrate because the location of the crash changed everything. The debris had landed in a region where Soviet influence was strong, which meant that sooner or later, Soviet teams would arrive. And once they did, the opportunity would be gone. The United States had a narrow window, a chance measured not in weeks, but in days. The mission would require speed, precision, and absolute secrecy. There could be no official involvement, no military presence, no indication that the United States was behind the operation, because if discovered, it would raise serious questions. Why was the United States retrieving Soviet property? How did they even know where it had landed? And what exactly were they trying to take? The answers to those questions could expose far more than a single mission. They could reveal the depth of American intelligence operations and escalate tensions at a time when both sides were already on edge. Still, the decision was made. The opportunity was too valuable to ignore. A covert team would be assembled, disguised, untraceable, sent into the region with one objective: find the satellite, recover what remained, and get out before anyone realized what had happened. And if you're interested in Cold War stories like this, where intelligence, risk, and global stakes collide in complete secrecy, consider subscribing, because what followed will become one of the most daring retrieval missions ever attempted. Somewhere in a remote landscape, scattered across unfamiliar terrain, pieces of the Soviet Union's most advanced technology were lying exposed, waiting, not just to be found, but to be taken. The operation began quietly. No official orders, no public acknowledgement, no trace that could be tied back to Washington. On paper, it didn't exist. The team selected for the mission wasn't made up of soldiers in uniform. There would be no flags, no insignias, no visible connection to the United States. Instead, the operation relied on something far more discreet: civilian cover. Intelligence officers and specialists were assembled, men trained not just in recovery, but in concealment. They would travel under false identities, carrying equipment that could be explained if anyone asked the wrong questions. Because in this mission, being seen wasn't the biggest risk. Being identified was. The destination was remote, difficult to access, and politically sensitive. The terrain itself added another layer of challenge. Dense vegetation, uneven ground, and limited infrastructure made movement slow and unpredictable. And somewhere within that landscape, fragments of the satellite were scattered. Time was already working against them. Local authorities had begun to notice unusual debris. Rumors were spreading, and in the background, there was a growing possibility that Soviet personnel would soon arrive to secure the crash site, which meant the window was closing fast. When the team finally reached the area, the first priority wasn't recovery. It was observation. They needed to understand the environment, who was watching, who was moving through the area, and whether they were already too late. Because if Soviet agents or even local forces had already secured the debris, the mission would be over before it truly began. But what they found gave them just enough time. The site hadn't been fully controlled yet. Pieces of the satellite were still exposed, scattered across fields and forested terrain, partially buried, partially visible. It was chaotic, uncontained, and for a brief moment, unclaimed. That was the opening they needed. The team moved carefully, avoiding attention, working methodically through the debris field. Every fragment mattered. Even the smallest component could reveal critical information: materials, design techniques, electronic systems. This wasn't just recovery. It was intelligence collection in its most physical form. Each piece was documented, cataloged, prepared for extraction. But the deeper they moved into the operation, the greater the risk became, because they weren't alone. Local civilians had begun to gather, curious, cautious, uncertain about what had fallen from the sky. Some had already taken fragments, unaware of their significance, and that created a new problem. The debris wasn't just in one place. It was spreading, which meant the team had to act quickly and carefully. They couldn't draw attention. They couldn't start asking direct questions. Instead, they relied on subtle methods, quiet exchanges, controlled negotiations, sometimes even purchasing pieces from locals who had no idea what they were holding. Every interaction carried risk, because too much interest would raise suspicion, and suspicion could bring the wrong people. At the same time, reports began to circulate that Soviet representatives were preparing to investigate the crash. If they arrived while the operation was still underway, everything could be exposed. And exposure wouldn't just end the mission. It could turn it into a diplomatic crisis. Still, the team pressed forward. Day by day, piece by piece, they gathered what they could. Critical components, sections of structure, fragments of equipment that hinted at something far more advanced than expected. And with each recovery, the stakes grew higher, because the more they collected, the more valuable and dangerous the mission became. At any moment, it could be interrupted. At any moment, someone could ask the wrong question. At any moment, the Soviets could arrive. And if that happened, there would be no time to explain, only time to disappear. Because this wasn't just about stealing technology. It was about doing it without leaving a trace. And that was becoming harder with every passing hour. As the operation continued, the pressure intensified. What had begun as a quiet recovery mission was now turning into a race, because signs of Soviet involvement were getting closer. Reports confirmed that officials linked to Moscow were moving toward the crash site. Whether they knew the full extent of what had fallen or simply suspected its importance didn't matter. What mattered was this: once they arrived, the mission would be over, and anyone still on the ground would be exposed. Inside the team, the urgency was clear. Every remaining hour had to be used. Every fragment that could be recovered had to be secured, because what they had already found was more significant than expected. Among the debris were components that revealed how the satellite had been built. not just its outer structure, but parts of its internal systems, camera elements, electronic modules, materials engineered for extreme conditions. Each piece offered insight into Soviet capabilities in space-based reconnaissance, and that insight had immediate value because understanding how the Soviet Union observed the world meant understanding what they could see, and more importantly, what they couldn't. Back in Washington, analysts were already preparing to study whatever the team could extract. Every fragment would be examined, measured, compared against existing intelligence. This wasn't just about curiosity. It was about closing gaps, reducing uncertainty, strengthening the ability to anticipate Soviet actions in a rapidly evolving technological domain. But on the ground, none of that mattered yet, because first, they had to get the material out. Extraction was the most dangerous phase of the mission. Transporting sensitive equipment through a region under increasing attention meant every movement had to be controlled. Routes had to be chosen carefully. Timing had to be precise. And any mistake could expose everything. Vehicles were arranged under cover identities, containers disguised, movement staggered to avoid patterns. Nothing could appear coordinated. Nothing could suggest that something valuable was being moved, because if it did, it would attract exactly the kind of attention they were trying to avoid. As the team prepared to leave, the situation tightened. Local interest had grown. More people were talking. More questions were being asked. And in the distance, the first signs of official presence began to appear. Uniforms, vehicles, authority. The margin for error had disappeared. This was the final window, the last chance to move without confrontation. The team didn't rush, because rushing would draw attention. Instead, they moved with controlled urgency, executing the plan exactly as designed, one convoy at a time, one movement at a time, until piece by piece, the material was removed from the area. And then, just as quietly as they had arrived, they were gone. Behind them, the site began to change. Control tightened, access restricted, and soon, any remaining debris would be secured by those who had come too late to stop what had already happened. The Soviets would recover what was left, but not everything, not the most important parts, not the pieces that had already crossed invisible lines, and were now on their way to American hands. From the outside, nothing seemed unusual. No confrontation, no public incident, no immediate sign that anything had been taken. But beneath that silence, a significant shift had already occurred. Because for the first time, the United States had direct access to Soviet satellite technology, not through observation, not through estimation, but through physical evidence. And that changed the equation. Because in the Cold War, knowledge wasn't just power, it was advantage. And now, that advantage was growing, but the true impact of what had been recovered was only beginning to be understood. When the material finally reached the United States, the real operation began. Inside secure facilities, the fragments were carefully unpacked, not as debris, but as answers. Engineers, intelligence analysts, and technical specialists moved in immediately. Every component was examined in detail, materials tested, circuitry mapped, design choices studied with precision. This wasn't just analysis, it was reconstruction. Piece by piece, they began to understand how the satellite had functioned, how it captured images, how it transmitted data, what its limitations were, and where its strengths truly lay. And what they discovered mattered, because it revealed something critical about Soviet capabilities in space-based reconnaissance. Not assumptions, not estimates, facts. They could now measure resolution, assess sensor quality, understand how much detail the Soviets could actually see from orbit, and just as importantly, what they couldn't. That knowledge gave the United States a strategic advantage that extended far beyond a single mission. It allowed planners to adapt, to adjust deployments, to protect sensitive operations from observation, and to move forward with a clearer understanding of the technological race unfolding above the Earth. Because space was no longer just a symbol of progress. It was a domain of intelligence, and whoever understood it better would shape the future of surveillance. The mission itself remained hidden. There were no public announcements, no official acknowledgement, No confirmation that anything had been recovered at all. From the outside, it was as if nothing had happened. But inside the intelligence community, the impact was undeniable. A rare opportunity had been seized. A gap had been closed. And a new layer of certainty had been added to a conflict built on uncertainty. It was a quiet success, the kind that defined much of the Cold War. No headlines, no recognition, just results. Because in this kind of conflict, victories weren't always visible. They happened in silence, in laboratories, in analysis rooms, in decisions made with better information than before. And that was the true outcome of the mission, not just the recovery of a satellite, but the strengthening of a system built on awareness, precision, and strategic intelligence. The ability to see clearly in a world where clarity was rare. Because in the Cold War, the difference between risk and control often came down to what you knew. And in this case, the United States knew more than it had the day before. The debris had fallen, the window had opened, and the opportunity had been taken. Without confrontation, without escalation, without the world ever realizing how close it had come to something far more complicated. Because some of the most important missions in history are the ones no one ever sees. If you found this story as fascinating as we did, make sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Because many of the most critical moments of the Cold War didn't happen in plain sight. They happened in the shadows.